Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're heading way back thousands of years to the ancient Andes. We're looking at a civilization called Vichama. Now, they live right on the Pacific coast. So you'd think, okay, primary food source, fish. Obviously, Ryan, we'll hold that thought because the story of Vichama, it's actually a lot more complicated and pretty surprising. We're taking a deep dive today into what the Vichama people ate, how that diet changed over, well, millennia, really, and what those changes tell us about their society, their culture, and, crucially, how they coped with a changing climate. Our mission here is to dig into the really important bits from some fascinating new research. There's a study by Dr. Luis Pesolano-Franco and his team using some pretty cutting-edge, science-stable isotope analysis to unlock these dietary secrets. So get ready for some unexpected findings and maybe a clearer picture of how ancient people adapted. Okay, so let's set the scene. There's been this long-standing debate, right, about early civilizations in the Central Andes. Was it fishing or was it farming that really kicked things off? I mean, you look at a place like Vichama, right on the coast, rich ocean nearby. You'd naturally lean towards fishing being dominant.
Yeah, you definitely would. But what's really interesting is, despite how dry the land is around there, I mean, extremely arid, and how rich the ocean is, the evidence we have now, it strongly points towards farming. Agriculture seems to have been the real engine, you know? We see some of the very first irrigation texts specifically for growing plants popping up around 4000 BCE.
Wow, that early.
Yeah. And by 3000 BCE, farming wasn't just a thing, it was pretty much the most important economic activity in that whole region.
And Vichama specifically, where was it again?
It's about 130 kilometers north of modern Vichama, right in the lower Huaura Valley, and like you said, super close to the ocean, only about 1.5 kilometers away.
So they had options, different ecosystems nearby, different resources they could potentially tap into.
Exactly, and this study looked at remains from 38 people, from two really distinct time periods. First, the Early Formative-1, that's roughly 1800 to 1500 BCE.
Okay.
And then jumping way forward, the Late Intermediate Period, or LIP, which is 1000 to 1300 CE. So big time gap.
Right, two different snapshots.
Which leads to the big question. How did these folks adapt their food strategies? Because the environment wasn't static, right? You had climate swings, changes in sea temperature, different rainfall, those big El Nino events.
All sorts of instability.
Yeah. So how did they deal with that? This study gives us a really powerful way to look into it.
Okay, so this is where the cool science comes in. How on earth do you figure out what someone ate thousands of years ago just from, like, bones and teeth?
Right. It sounds like magic, but it's pretty clever chemistry. Dr. Pesolano-Franco's team used stable isotope analysis, specifically carbon and nitrogen isotopes. They looked at two things in the human remains: collagen and bioappetite.
Collagen and bioappetite. Okay, what do those tell you?
So think of collagen, it's mainly protein, right? It tells you mostly about the protein sources in the diet and where someone fits in the food web, their trophic level.
Like, were they eating plants or animals that ate plants or animals that ate other animals?
Exactly. Then there's bioappetite. That gives you a picture of the whole diet. Carbs, fats, proteins, the total energy intake.
Got it. So collagen for protein, bioappetite for everything.
Pretty much. And we're looking for these chemical fingerprints. So C3 plants, that's most plants, like beans, chilies, fruits, tubers, roots. They have one kind of carbon isotope signature. Then you have C4 plants. In this area, that's mainly maize and amaranth. They have a different signature.
Okay, C3 versus C4, different signals.
Yes. But here's the tricky part, especially near the coast. Marine resources, like fish and shellfish, can sometimes have isotope values that look a bit like C4 plants.
So just looking at carbon might confuse fish eating with maize eating.
Potentially, yeah. That's why looking at multiple isotopes, like nitrogen as well, and combining the signals from collagen and bioappetite helps sort things out. It gives you a much clearer picture. It lets us go way beyond just finding, leftover seeds or fish bones. We can actually reconstruct what individual people were eating over the course of their lives.
That is seriously impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to that first period then. The Early Formative-1, 1800 to 1500 BCE. You said this was a big time for Vichama.
Yeah, it was really flourishing. They were building monumental architecture. It was becoming a major political center in the valley, a real hub.
So at its peak, politically important, right by the sea.
Yeah.
What were they eating? Did the isotopes match the expected coastal diet?
Well, this is where it gets surprising. During EF1, the main food source, according to the isotopes, was C3 plants.
The beans, roots, fruits, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those staple crops. And the marine resources, fish, shellfish, only about 25% of their diet.
Only a quarter for a major coastal center. That is counterintuitive.
It really is.
So what about the C4 plants then? Maize, specifically. We always think of maize with ancient American civilization.
Right. But here, C4 plants, including maize and maybe some amaranth, were actually a tiny part of the diet, like less than 10%.
Less than 10%. Why so little? Was the area not good for growing maize?
Well, Dr. Pezzolanfranco points out the valley could theoretically grow maize, but it seems the local farmers just traditionally focused on other crops. Maybe maize was around, but perhaps it was saved for special occasions, rituals, not everyday food.
Huh. Interesting.
And maize is thirsty, It needs a pretty reliable water supply. Given the climate instability they were likely facing back then, relying heavily on maize might have been too risky.
So they went for the safer bets, the more resilient crops.
Seems like it. Things like cucurbits, squashes, and gourds and tubers, stuff that could handle variable conditions better. This heavy reliance on C3 plants suggests they really ramped up their farming, intensified agriculture. And that probably supported Vichama's political power during that time.
Okay, that makes sense. Farming, fueling the political center. Now let's jump forward. Big jump. 3,000 years later to the late intermediate period, 1,000 to 1,300 CE. You mentioned Vichama wasn't the big political player anymore by then, more like a fishing village.
Yeah, its regional influence seems to have faded quite a bit. The character of the site changed.
So did their diet change dramatically too? Did they finally lean into that coastal identity and eat mostly fish?
Well, yes and no. It definitely changed, but maybe not how you'd expect. During the LIP, the ocean conditions were actually different. Sea surface temperatures were lower, which generally means marine productivity was higher. More fish, more resources available.
Okay, some more stuff to catch.
Right. And the evidence shows they did eat more marine food compared to that earlier EF1 period. It became a bigger part of the diet. But C3 plants, those same beans, roots, fruits, were still the primary source of food for most people in Vichama, even in this later period.
Still mostly plant-based, even with more fish available and being eaten.
That's what the isotopes suggest. And it lines up with the archaeology, too. Archaeologists find lots of fishing gear, fish bones, shells from this LIP period. So fishing was clearly important.
So more fishing, yes. The plants were still number one. They didn't just, completely switch over.
It doesn't seem like it. It paints a picture of really flexible and resilient strategies. Opportunistic, maybe. They could ramp up farming or ramp up fishing depending on what the climate was doing, what was available. But farming always seems to have been that core foundation.
That adaptability is key, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we even see really specific evidence, like there were two young guys from the LIP whose isotopes showed really high marine consumption, and they also had something called auditory exostosis.
Auditory exostosis, what's that?
It's basically bony growths in the ear canal. It's often found in people who spend a lot of time diving or fishing in cold water.
Ah, so physical evidence matching the dietary evidence for these specific guys being divers or fishermen.
Exactly. It suggests a diversified economy. Some people might specialize more in fishing, others in farming. But it was likely more small scale, farming and fishing for your household, not necessarily generating huge surpluses for a centralized state like in the earlier period.
So putting it all together, what does this tell us about the bigger picture of ancient Andean life? It feels like diet wasn't just about calories, it was tied into everything. Society, politics, climate.
Oh, absolutely. The isotope data really suggests two quite different ways of life, or economic systems, that mirror those changes in political structure over time. You have the EF1 period, centralized power, coordinated large-scale farming, probably aimed at creating surplus to support that political structure.
Right.
Then you have the LIP, no big central authority at Vichama, and the diet reflects that. It's more diversified, small-scale farming mixed with fishing, likely focused on just feeding the family or local community.
And climate is the backdrop to all this shifting.
It seems to be a major driver. Those climate swings, wet periods, dry periods, they directly impacted both the ocean and the land. So back in the EF1, maybe the ocean conditions were more variable, marine life less predictable or abundant. That could have pushed them towards intensifying farming, relying more on the land.
Making agriculture the more stable bet then.
Possibly. But then later in the LIP, you get those cooler sea temperatures, potentially more abundant marine life, and maybe it was drier on land. That combination could have encouraged more focus on the ocean alongside the farming they were still doing.
Wow. So it's not just what they ate, but why they ate it, driven by this constant interplay between environment and society. That's That's really fascinating.
It is. They developed these, you could call them adaptive buffer strategies. They could lean more on farming or more on fishing when the conditions favored one or the other. Being flexible, being resilient, that was clearly crucial for surviving and thriving there long term.
That resilience is amazing.
And it might even help explain bigger historical patterns, like shifts in power between coastal groups and inland groups at different times. It's all connected. Future research is even looking into how much people moved around. Were people moving between the coast and maybe even the Amazon region through natural corridors? That could also affect diet and how resources were exchanged. Lots still to uncover.
Yeah, the story's definitely not over. This deep dive into Vichama, though, it really drives home how tangled up diet, climate, and the very structure of society were in the ancient Andes. It's just a fantastic lesson in human adaptability. And it makes you think, doesn't it? As we wrap up, here's something to chew on. If someone did this kind of stable isotope analysis on your bones thousands of years from now, what story would your diet tell about our world today? About our climate or society? What kind of unexpected links are there between the food on our plates right now, our environment, and the way our modern world works? Something to ponder. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay curious.